Hello and welcome to the Game Theory Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Vicini. We're powered by CLNS Media. Today on the show, we've got good friend of the program, Cole Zwicker, on. We are going to talk about the NBA MVP race at the top, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the NBA draft, things that we've seen over the course of the last week, some of my travels over to Las Vegas to see the West Coast Conference and the Pac-12 and the Mountain West Conference, to see, a couple of these great prospects like Killian Tillie, Rui Hachimura, Chandler Hutchison's out here. Saw DeAndre Ayton live yesterday. And then we're going to talk a little bit about team defense as it relates to the NBA draft. Cole had a really, really great piece on that yesterday over at the Stepien. But Cole, how's it going, man?
It's going good. I'm excited to be on air with the new chairman of the Pac-12. I've been following along your Twitter as far as watching these games. I caught one last night because I don't get Pac-12 Network on DirecTV in Seattle. So I saw the FS1 game, Oregon, Utah. Jeez, man. That's got to be a little bit of a drag. I mean, watching basketball live is great, but the games have been kind of lukewarm.
The morning sessions or like the early afternoon sessions of the Pac-12 tournament have been great. They've actually been really, really exciting. The night sessions of the Pac-12 tournament have been an abomination. So the first night it was Washington, Oregon State in overtime, and then Oregon and Washington State in overtime. It had to be the worst overtime back-to-back in the history of basketball. Like the Oregon-Washington State game, Oregon won that game scoring like 0.9 points per possession. The Oregon State-Washington game, both teams played zone. Neither of them can shoot. And it was just a slog and a drag. And like it was 55-55 or something going into overtime. It was, oh boy.
Yeah, I've only caught pretty much the Oregon games. I watched a little bit of Oregon and Washington State. I streamed that. I kind of regret that decision. But
I have to be very clear on one thing. It was all worth going to the Pac-12 tournament, if only so that I got to see the halftime show of Utah-Oregon last night. It was the worst halftime show in history, and it was amazing. Like, first and foremost, the band was called the Australian Bee Gees, which is like saying the fucking British Beatles. Like, the Bee Gees were Australian. Like, what are we talking about here? And they were so off in terms of their rhythm and everything that it was just unlistenable. Like, I literally walked up to one of USC's assistants, Martin Bahar, and went, "What the hell is going on? What is this?" And he was just like, "I don't know, but we have to get out of here and like actually go do film." So I'm very lucky to be leaving right now. And I was just like, yeah, man, like, look, I don't know what's going on. And then I just hope that the basketball is better today, mostly in the night session, because there's a really great game, Arizona UCLA in the first session, and then or in the first game, and then USC takes on Oregon in the second session. It's going to be at least a good NBA draft prospect filled evening. So I'm excited about that. Let's talk about the NBA MVP race, though. I think that we're both in agreement that James Harden should be number one, correct? Like, we don't really need to battle about that.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to argue against that at this point. The most ridiculous stat of the entire season is when Harden, Chris Paul, and Capella play, they are 34-1. That's unfathomably good.
That's ridiculous, first and foremost. The second thing I will say, too, though, if you even look at like his per 100 possession stats, they are impossible right now. He's averaging 42 points, 12 assists, and 7 rebounds per 100 possessions. That is just so bananas to me. Like, it does not seem possible, and he's doing it on a 62.4 true shooting percentage, in large part because he's such an efficient three-point shooter. He's so efficient from the foul line, gets to the foul line a ton. But what he has done offensively this year it's honestly beyond what I could have possibly expected from an NBA scoring guard at any point. And he's so much more than a scoring guard now, but like his efficiency is just so off the charts remarkable that it's almost impossible to ignore him as like the very clear, I don't know if he's the unanimous MVP. I don't know if he'll end up getting that distinction, and it's kind of a ridiculous distinction anyway, but like he has been very obviously the best player in the NBA this year, I think.
It's just ridiculous looking at some of the numbers. Like, he averages 9.6 isolation possessions per game. The next highest volume is 6.5 with LeBron, and then it drops off to 5.3. He is at 1.244 points per possession. That is higher than anybody else I see in the top 17 right now as far as volume, and he has almost double the volume or triple the volume as most of those guys. What he's able to create off the bounce, off the dribble, getting to the line, getting to his spots regularly, so much of the onus of the offense is on him to create as far as for himself and for others efficiently. We just haven't seen this kind of initiator prowess in a long time for an offensive player. Like, you can argue he's one of the best offensive players of the past 20 years. He's gotten to that point where he's just so efficient. He's so ruthless as a decision maker. I think he's really improved. He's one of the guys where he came into the league as a good passer, and he became a great passer. So there's just, the scheme fits him perfectly. D'Antoni really knows how to optimize him and get the most out of the entire offense as far as efficiency. What he's doing is just, honestly, it leaves me lost for words at times.
He is in the overall 97th percentile in terms of isolation possessions so far this year. I have never seen anything close to that on his volume. You know, you mentioned the 1.2 number. He's shooting 57% effective field goal percentage in isolation situations. That is seriously just an absolutely impossible number. We can't emphasize this enough. Like, the average of, or like, I guess maybe the way to put it is like, the median number here in terms of effective field goal percentage in those situations is like 42%, 41%. He is 15% higher than that on more possessions than seems possible to take on. Yeah,
and the ultimate point here is that not only is this effort Herculean, but it's leading to wins. Like, Houston's won 17 straight games. They're the best team in the league. Like, who expected that coming into the season? The conversation, remember, if we go all the way back to September, October, was, can Chris Paul and James Harden play together? I think that's an emphatic yes.
Well, yeah, there's that. And, I mean, I was never worried about that. I didn't really understand that.
I wasn't either.
Just because Chris Paul has always been such a good spot-up shooter. He really had been one of the best three-point shooters in the NBA over the course of the previous 3 years, and he just didn't get credit for it. I have another absurd number about the number of isolation possessions that James Harden has taken this year. So the fourth most isolation possessions in the NBA this year belong to Harrison Barnes. He's taken 253 isolation possessions overall. That is less than half of what James Harden has taken in isolation. And Harrison Barnes is in fourth overall in the entire NBA in isolation possessions. He's literally doubling up everyone almost in isolation possessions other than LeBron and Russell Westbrook.
Yeah, you just can't really, it's hard to react to something like that because we haven't seen this kind of effort on this high of volume. Just nobody has this kind of efficiency on self-created possessions. Isolation possessions are hard, for the most part. I mean, I know when you're going against Carmelo Anthony the other night, like James Harden was absolutely rinsing him because that was the whole play design, was getting Anthony on switches, and Harden does that. I mean, that's how they scheme their offense. It's not that complex. It's just they have the talent level to really just beat you in so many different ways, but really in the most simple ways. They can just put Harden on your worst defensive player and orchestrate their offense that way, and Harden can take advantage of that. And there's just not a lot of guys who can do that consistently at the level and the efficiency that Harden can.
Yeah, and he's become such an efficient passer in isolation as well, or in transition as well. I'm sorry, out on the break. He's only in the 55th percentile in terms of finishing in transition this year, but whenever you add his assists into that number, he's actually in the 96th percentile because he is so good at finding teammates in the right spots on the break.
Yeah, I mean, in the defense, for the most part, I mean, he's not great off the ball defensively. I think he's improved a little bit. Like in years past, he's been pretty atrocious. From the games I watch, I haven't seen too much Houston this year. Seems like he kind of drifts at times, but honestly, like what they're doing and how they're schemed, like he has to exert maximum energy offensively. Him and Chris Paul, they have to carry that burden. Paul's always going to defend, but I don't know if you can really knock him too much defensively. Historically, that's been the argument against him, is he takes too much off the table. I think at his size, especially in the playoffs when he guards bigger players, you can put him on like a 4 type, and he's that strong where he can anchor against those guys in the post. So there are ways to use him that way. It's just from an offensive standpoint, it's you can't use the defensive argument to really offset what he's done this year. I don't think that really works.
Yeah, and there are only 2 real numbers in terms of synergy that I look at on defensive possessions. I look at post-up numbers and I look at isolation numbers because They're not an exact science in terms of being able to determine blame, but they're much closer than spot-up possessions, than pick-and-roll ball handler possessions, than, guys who lose guys coming off screens, because there are just so many more moving parts. Whenever you're in isolation, whenever you're in post-ups, it's more of just you versus your man. Would you agree with that?
Definitely. There's a lot of noise with synergy. Like, if you're a pick-and-roll ball handler and you switch that action, you could be considered part of that action, even though you're off ball now, right? So there's more noise to that,
right? And we're not talking shit about the loggers on synergy. They do a great job. It's just really hard to assign individual problems on defense, right? But in the two situations that we looked at in terms of post up and isolation as being important, James Harden is in the 92nd percentile in terms of defending post ups right now, and he does that defending a lot of bigger players, because it's not that they hide him on bigger players, but they often do play him on bigger players because it makes more sense for his skill set. He's also in the 81st percentile in defending isolation possessions as well. He's done a really, really nice job this year of not being as big of a problem defensively as he has been in the past.
And that's all he needs to do. We're not talking about a guy who needs to be a lockdown defensive player.
We're not even saying he's a positive. I do think he has been a neutral, though, this year.
He just needs to be salvageable. With the offensive output he's putting up, which is historic, if he's salvageable defensively, you'll take that trade-off 100 out of 100 times.
So the reason that we did this podcast, though, the reason we did the MVP discussion podcast is because we wanted to talk about Anthony Davis somehow, and we thought this would be a really interesting kind of prism into doing it. Anthony Davis right now is doing things to carry this Pelicans team that I didn't think were fathomable, really. So on the season, Anthony Davis is averaging 28.1 points, 11.1 rebounds, 2.3 assists. If you go over the course of his, last, what are we going to go to? Let's go to January 12th. If you go over that time, 31, 12, 2, and 2.6. That's not possible.
He's ridiculous. Like in February, he's at 35, 13, just over 2 blocks. It's just what he's doing to carry that team to wins. I mean, he's always been a great player. We've known that. But how it's translating to actually beating teams. Like, I watched the Clippers game the other night, and what he did in that game was just absurd as far as his shot functionality. He scored in every single way possible. He was literally willing that team down the stretch with like fadeaway jump shots, like face ups. He would blow past his defender. He can just do so much. He's the best offensive big in the league to me. If he plays the 5, and I think that's kind of where his value peaks, if he's willing to do that, and he kind of has to be with Boogie out next to Nico. If he plays the 5, there's nobody that can really guard him, right? Because he can score in every single way. He can pick and pop now. He shot a step back 3 in that Clippers game. It's like, what do you do against something like that? When the guy can put the ball on the floor, he can shoot at any instant over the top. He's a monster, man. He's one of the best offensive bigs of the modern age, and I think we're going to see that manifest going forward. Like, if they make the playoffs, he's going to be a huge problem. He was a huge problem for the Warriors when he was like 20 years old.
Yeah, he was. He's a significant problem, and I mean, he's carrying them to the 4th place spot in the West right now, which, without DeMarcus Cousins and with the roster holes that I think both of us would agree that they have, although they did better than what I think a lot of people gave them credit for in the summer, including myself. I did not think they did enough to shore up the wing position. Darius Miller has given them really good minutes this year, like really, really good minutes. I mean, Ian Clark has not been good. We can say that, but Etuan Moore has been good for them. He's actually been very good. I think it's worth saying, given the fact that he's shooting 50, 42, and something like 70% from 3, I think. He's been the rest of this team has kind of been underrated, I guess, in a way, but they're all brought up by what Anthony Davis does and the attention that he brings and, gets from opposing teams because he's so talented. He's such a problem. And, his jump shooting this year has not been like at the insane elite levels it's been in the past. Like, he's only in the 35th percentile right now in catch and shoot jumpers, which is pretty weird for a guy that is as skilled a shooter as he is. But it just doesn't matter. He's too good. He gets space, and as soon as he gets space, he's unbelievable.
And we got to give Drew Holiday a little bit of credit here. It's a really top-heavy roster, and Drew got killed for the contract, of course, because he had, the Pelicans beneath the rock and a hard place.
He had them over a barrel.
they had no cap space. They knew they had to resign him. He was their only other guy they could really afford, and he's been awesome this year. He's been so good, and they really needed him to be that guy, and he's been kind of Davis's second guy. After Boogie went out, of course, he was a third behind that, and it's still a top-heavy roster. I agree with you. They've gotten contributions from other areas. Even Rondo gives them good minutes at times. I still don't think the roster makes a ton of sense, but it doesn't, like the way Davis is playing right now, which is as a top 3, top 4 player in the league. You only need a certain amount behind him. Guys like that can carry your team, especially when they're playing to the level that Davis is on a night in and night out basis in the regular season. Just his effort level and how, I don't know. Have you seen this from a big as far as recently? It's just really hard for a big to really matter significantly on offense in the modern game, just because you mostly see the contributions like Joel Embiid. He can do a ton offensively, but it really doesn't add up to the value that Anthony Davis brings. Most of the value is on defense. And what Anthony Davis brings offensively, I think, in the modern game is ridiculous. I don't know if anybody else can really match the diversity of skills that he has.
I mean, it's funny. The other guy who can is on his team, and he's just out with injury.
True.
Like DeMarcus, I think, does this stuff, not regularly, but he's a hub for offense, essentially, and that's what makes him so valuable. But no, I agree with you. Kristaps maybe this year at 1.2, like maybe in the first half of the season, but he slowed down a little bit. It's hard for big guys too, just from an attrition standpoint, because they get hit so often in the paint. They just take so much of a beating trying to do all of the tough things that you have to do as a big man. Plus their bodies are just naturally more brittle from having elongated. It becomes tough to take on as much usage as guards and wings can take on. And Anthony Davis is doing it with just a remarkable level of efficiency and energy levels on both ends.
Yeah, and for me, what gets it again is like they're 4th in the Western Conference in a stacked conference. He's leading them to wins. Like even Boogie in the past, I agree. He's been an offensive hub, but where's it really translated to the bottom line? And I know that's kind of unfair because the Kings teams weren't talented. Drew Holiday's probably the second best player on those teams. But at the same time, Anthony Davis is doing this sustainably, and it's leading to a top 4 seed in the Western Conference. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah, no, I'm totally with you on this. What would you say about Anthony Davis's defense this year? I think he's often got a bit of an inflated reputation defensively. Not to say that he's been a bad defender or hasn't been an above average defender, but I think he often gets talked about as like one of the league's 5 best defenders, when I don't really think that's probably the case. What have you thought of his defense so far?
I think he's impactful. I don't think he's elite defender as far as big men go. I just don't know if he can really consistently physically anchor at that position. Like he can block shots. He's great in space. I think in the playoffs he becomes more valuable just because you get less of the behemoths. You get more of the versatility, and I think that's what suits his game. So I don't think he's a high. I think like Joel Embiid, for example, is a better defensive player. Gobert is clearly. So there are bigs that are more impactful, but for what he brings on both the interior and the perimeter, not a lot of guys can match his overall skill set. And I think you'll see that manifest most importantly in the playoffs. Yeah,
like I would say both of the guys you mentioned, Embiid and Gobert, are better. I would say Al Horford has been better this year defensively.
Sure. Doing
a great job carrying the Celtics to the best defense, second best defense, depending on the night, in the NBA this season. I mean, Draymond Green hasn't been quite as good defensively this year as we've seen in the past, but for me, I would still probably take Dre over him defensively. We obviously also haven't gotten Kawhi Leonard this year, who makes such an incredible impact. Who do you think has been better defensively, though, Steven Adams or Anthony Davis this year? I think that's more the category, right?
I totally agree with that. I love Steven Adams, man. I know you do, too. I would say probably Steven Adams, just for the physicality he provides in the regular season when you have to play so many of these bigger centers and really outmuscle them, and that's what he does best. Like, he's so good as far as physicality goes.
Strong guy is strong,
and he plays big too. It's not just like his size. Like, he plays bigger than even his size. So I would say as a regular season defender, maybe Adams has been more impactful, but you could easily convince me the other way.
Yeah, no, but I think that's more what we're talking about here with AD. We're talking about a very high level defender that is not among the elite, but whenever you're also producing at like a top 5 offensive level, that gets you into second place in our MVP race.
Absolutely.
Number 3, we have LeBron, both of us, right?
Correct. Yes.
So whenever I initially kind of started this exercise, I did have LeBron at number 2. I don't really know if you convinced me otherwise or if I kind of convinced myself otherwise of it, but I do think that it's worth giving LeBron just a small punishment for the defensive side of the floor. He just has a few too many nights where he takes that side of the floor off. And I mean, this is a team that has the same exact record as the New Orleans Pelicans right now. And in that regard, it's really difficult, I think, to say that LeBron has unquestionably been more impactful than Davis so far if we're just going by the letter of what's happened so far this season.
Yeah, it just depends on what your criteria is for MVP. I mean, LeBron's clearly, in my opinion, still the best player in basketball. When he wants to be, like, nobody gets to his level. Like, we saw that against the Nuggets the other night, like in the fourth quarter, where he was just like, screw it, I'm taking one-footed fadeaways and I'm gonna beat the Nuggets, and he did. But I think you have to punish him a little bit for the defense. He's 33. He's already played probably 2 or 3. Like, he's played 2 extra seasons or whatever. I don't know how you want to calibrate that as far as playoff basketball, higher intensity. There's a lot of wear in his body. He goes to the finals every year. I don't have a problem with him taking nights off defensively. He just played too much basketball where I'm fine with it. But I think if you're having an MVP discussion, which is a regular season award based on performance in the regular season, then you can reward somebody like Anthony Davis, who has played harder defensively. And like you noted, same record. So it's not like LeBron's having a hugely more impactful year than Anthony Davis. He's still the best player at his peak. But for the MVP award, I think you have to award a little bit to consistency in the regular season.
Yeah, both of us are agreed on this. Like, if we were starting a team, we would take LeBron, like, for this year. You know what I mean? Yes. If we were drafting teams to play in the playoffs this year, LeBron is our guy. I mean, unquestionably, he is the guy you want on your team. But as Cole said, this is a regular season award, and while LeBron's numbers and production have been astronomical, I'm just going to read them off. 27 points, 9 assists, 8.4 rebounds. The 9 assists would represent a career high. The 8.4 rebounds would be second in his career numbers. He's also doing it on a 62% true shooting percentage. So the offense is right in line with Harden and with Anthony Davis. I mean, no question there. It's just that with Harden, he is the orchestrator and catalyst of what is currently already a 51-win team. And with Anthony Davis is anchoring both sides of the floor for a team that is, currently has the same record as the Cleveland Cavaliers and is in the top half of both offensive and defensive rating.
Yeah, and historically, when you look at the MVP award and who wins that, it's usually associated, of course, with team performance, and LeBron's not a top 4 team in the league right now. And you usually see the players in those top 4, top 3 teams get the benefit of the doubt as far as contributing to winning when they also have the stats. So it's just, again, it's an MVP award. It's a regular season award based on usually team performance in association with personal performance and how that drives it. LeBron's still the best player in basketball. So whatever you want to call the MVP, I'll still take LeBron. But for a regular season award, I would take Anthony Davis slightly ahead. And I know there is some recency bias there, but the recency has been ridiculous for Davis.
I will let you jump to who you have at number 4. Who would you go with?
I'm going to go with Steph, just because I feel like he's been so impactful. I know there's a missed games element with a lot of these guys, but Steph has been so impactful on the floor for the Warriors, and I still think you have to reward those guys. I mean, they're a 1 game behind the Rockets in the loss column, so it's not like they're far back. They've played great ball. Like you said, Draymond hasn't been quite the same this year. Durant's been awesome. I just think that Steph is the engine behind that system. I know in the playoffs Durant can get to that level. He's clearly a top 3 player in the league to me. But Stephen Curry, I think sometimes he gets a little overlooked, which is impossible to say. But his performance on a yearly basis, just being this outlier kind of initiator type, best shooter of all time, really the fulcrum behind their offense as far as all their off-screen actions. He screens hard. There's so many little things that he does to help that team that a lot of stars don't do. So I would lean Steph slightly over Giannis, but those would be my last 2 guys on the list.
So here are the numbers I would give you on why I would have Stephen Curry certainly in my top 5 for MVP right now. Kevin Durant, when he's on the floor, Golden State's offense is at 118.7 per 100 possessions. When he's off the floor, they're at 111.6. So, incredibly high impact player offensively. They need him on the floor as much as they can get him on the floor. When Stephen Curry is on the floor for the Warriors, they have a 123.1 offensive rating and a 107.9 offensive rating when he's off the floor. 123.1 points per 100 possessions when Stephen Curry is on the floor.
Not surprising. I mean, that's a ridiculous number.
That is surprising. That number is impossible.
I know, but that's like the thing with Steph, right? Everything about him has been impossible. Like his emergence into this kind of player, we've never seen it before. So for me, I always expect the impossible from Steph. Guys like that who just bring. I'm telling you, in the league right now, the top end players are historically good players. Like we could be talking about, like 3-4 top 15 players. So when you watch these guys over the years, it just what Steph has brought to the game in so many different ways, and how that's manifested on the floor in a positive fashion for his team, nothing really surprises me anymore, even though, like you noted, it is a ridiculous number.
So people like often discuss Dirk as a top 20 to 25 player ever, right? Like that's about his range.
Yes, I love Dirk.
I also love Dirk. I think that is a well-earned range for him in the all-time ranking list. You would clearly take Stephen Curry ahead of Dirk all time, right?
Oh, yes, I would.
Like not even debatable at this stage,
no.
Right? Like two-time MVP, two-time champion already. And his effect on the game is just unparalleled. I mean, Dirk's effect on the game was similar to what Steph's was, with the way that he, I don't want to say ushered in the idea of a stretch 4 or stretch 5, but he certainly, created a new paradigm for the way that you could space the floor offensively, having a elite level shooting big man. Stephen Curry is just like totally categorically broken basketball.
Steph's value as an initiator too just trumps what Dirk did, and I don't want to get down on Dirk because he's the best shooting big man of all time.
Right.
He added
I don't mean to disparage Dirk when I do this either.
Yeah, I mean, we both love Dirk, and he's an incredible player, but what Steph brings value-wise just eclipses Dirk because he initiates their sets at times. He can create off the dribble. He creates for others at a higher level than Dirk did, and he creates for himself. He's the biggest scheme-changing guard we've ever seen as far as his gravity as an on-ball shooting threat. So it's not a knock on Dirk. It's just Stephen Curry is a legit, he might end up as a top 10 player of all time, and who would have ever saw that coming?
Yeah, and also let's hope that he gets 100% healthy. He also rolled an ankle again last night, and that has to, be scary for Golden State fans, and it has to be a little bit scary for the rest of the NBA as a whole, just because the NBA is more fun when Stephen Curry is launching bombs from 30 feet.
Oh, it's definitely more fun. I mean, I don't get the argument that the Warriors aren't fun. They absolutely are fun. If you just put aside the fact that everybody joined forces, they're an awesome team to watch.
Yeah, and then we should talk about Giannis real quick, because I agree with you. I would have Giannis in the 4-5. I don't know which one I would go, Giannis or Steph. It's close. I mean, I will say Giannis at 4 just to be different from you, I guess. Giannis right now, 27 points, 10 rebounds a night, 5 assists, 1.5 blocks, 1.5 steals, carrying them on both ends as he did last year. He's even taken a ridiculous step forward as an offensive player this year, almost at a 60% true shooting percentage again. I mean, he's just absurd. He is going to be so incredible if he learns to shoot.
Yeah, and what he's doing with, in my opinion, this year, kind of an overrated supporting cast. Like Middleton hasn't been quite as good. Parker just got back. With all the turmoil with the coaching, he's just kind of performed through all of that. They haven't really figured themselves out yet. I think the Bucks are still kind of looking for an identity. Bledsoe helps them in certain capacities. They've been without Malcolm Brogdon, which impacts their rotation. I don't think that the rest of that roster is that great. I think it's good. It'll make the playoffs consistently with a guy like Giannis, but what he's doing, he's carrying that team. And I think that's the theme we see across multiple of these teams is the stars just carry them. And that's how they're rewarded with this kind of award. That's why we'd have Giannis in the top 5. Despite the individual success he's had, he's also carrying Milwaukee to a playoff spot.
Yeah, no, 100% there with you. And plus, like, his defense is really, really good. Like Yes,
it is.
Even when he is, maybe taking a small possession off, his length just totally alters the way that our offenses have to do anything around him. They have to account for that at every single moment because he's so quick and so agile that he can spring and just jump a passing lane. Basically, if he's even like 1.5 passes away, it doesn't even have to be like just 1 pass away.
And I don't think he's even being optimized yet. That's the scariest thing about Giannis is you can use him more as a screener. You can play him as the 5. He's that big. I mean, in the playoffs, you can play that guy as your 5. He can protect the rim with his length. I mean, he's a dynamic chaos creator at the 4 usually, but you can put him at the 5. You can put him in pick and roll and force switches. He's kind of that guy who can dictate matchups at the highest levels of play to me. And those guys are insanely valuable. Guys like LeBron who can just alter the entire way that you defend him just because he can beat you in so many different ways. I think Giannis can be that kind of guy, and he hasn't really been tapped into that way yet. So I'm kind of waiting for that.
I will say they have been doing that just a little bit more recently. Not a lot more, but like they'll do flashes of that at times now that Parker is back. They'll run out like a Middleton, Parker, Giannis front line occasionally. Like they did it to close one game last week, and it was terrifying.
God, that's a fun matchup. That's an awesome lineup. And I think they do that occasionally. I just like to see Giannis utilized better even in those matchups. Like sometimes you'll see him in the corner spotting up. And I think that's just wasting his talent. Like he's not going to be a threat from the corner as far as a gravity threat. You want him involved as a play finisher, as a play creator. So when you fully tap into that, I think like the Sixers, for example, can use Ben Simmons more as the roll man. There's just ways to utilize these kind of mismatch creating types who can post up mismatches. They can beat less agile guys off the bounce. We're just seeing kind of, I don't want to say the surface of Giannis because we're seeing a lot more than that, but I don't think we've seen his peak yet.
Oh, yeah, no, 100% agreed. It's terrifying. The fact that he is, I guess he's 23 now, and that's where we're at. Speaking of a near 23-year-old, he turns 23 at some point this week. What have you thought of Jabari Parker in his return so far?
I've only caught snippets of him, honestly. The offense, how does he look explosiveness-wise to you? He looks pretty similar to me. I don't think there's a drop-off that I was kind of worried about.
I would say that there is a comfortability factor there that isn't quite there. Like he's still adjusting and getting back, but at the moments where he unleashes it, it still looks the same. Does that make sense?
It does. I think that's really understandable from his point, too. I think that's a sound observation. If he has that still, he's going to be a dynamic player offensively if he can shoot the ball at a respectable level. The defense has still been where the defense has always been for me. He's just really lost off ball. And if he could even be salvageable defensively, he could be an incredibly valuable player. It's just, I don't know how that guy profiles to playoff basketball when guys are just going to headhunt him, pick on him off ball. We'll see. Yeah,
I'll be interested. I don't think he's as disastrous as some of the league's like guys who get headhunted constantly defensively. Like I think that he can at least provide resistance there, but we'll see. That might be kind of, asking a lot and being optimistic on it. I'll admit that. I'm always optimistic on Jabari because A, I love his game. B, I love his story. And C, I love the fact that he is like an awesome, incredibly thoughtful human being who uses his platform for good. So like, I'm always going to be a guy who's like very, very in on Jabari and wanting him to succeed.
Oh, me too. I'm 100% there with you. And I think at least he's big and strong, where a lot of guys who get headhunted are. So maybe in isolation, he's not the most agile as far as quickness, but I think he has speed and he has strength. So at least he has that. I'm more worried about him off the ball. Like when you run him off actions and where he doesn't know what the hell's going on, and that leads to an open three. That's where I worry about him the most. But I'm definitely pulling for him.
Let's move on. Let's talk about some of the things that I've seen in the Pac-12 and, out here in Vegas this week. I was at Gonzaga BYU on Tuesday night when the Killian Tillie show happened. Killian Tillie won the MVP of the West Coast Conference tournament. He was just totally absurd. He shot 13 of 14 from three throughout the course of the tournament. He is now at 50% on the season from three on 90 attempts. So small sample, but like his shot looks great in terms of the way it works off of action. 13 points, 6 rebounds a night. Over the course of those games, he averaged 24 points and I want to say like 5.5 rebounds or something like that. He never missed more than 3 shots despite taking at least 11 in every game. Tillie is a really, really, really good prospect who I really hope returns to college next year.
I don't know, man. The stock and kind of what he's getting right now, I mean, he's at peak value, of course. He's shot the hell out of the ball recently. He's a really good player. I really like him as a basketball player. We've talked about him in the past, like that Creighton game. If you guys want to go back and watch that game, he was awesome as a team defender in that. He's got great mobility as far as his feet playing higher in his stance. The shot looks projectable. I think his skill level is a little underrated, even though the decision-making at times leaves you wanting. It's all about projection for me and how much value do you think he can bring at the next level as a 4, as a 5. It's tough. I think he's kind of a tweener a little bit, so that's hard to fit in. But we know he's a good basketball player. He's a really good basketball player.
So, like, if you knew you were getting a slightly better Joffrey Laverne, like, you're pretty happy with that, right? Like, just a more effective offensive Joffrey Laverne?
Yeah, I have Tillie in the 20s right now. I would take a risk on him in that area. I don't think it's much of a risk. I think he's an NBA player. It's just, for me, it's about value. How high is the ceiling in the modern game? I know he can shoot. That's going to have value in itself. Defensively, he can hold his own, but he's not very strong. He's not ridiculously long. So it's hard to profile him in a specific position, but at the same time, he can really play, and there's a place in the league for someone like that.
So that's what scares me, and I'll kind of get into the more in-person nitty-gritty scouting stuff now that I noticed while I was there. I've been huge on Tillie all year. I've had him in the top 40 the entire season. I think he is a remarkable team basketball player. He is going to play in the NBA. I have no question about that. Where I'm worried about him right now is that his feet in person are a little bit slower than what you think they are. I thought he was really, really, really good whenever I watched him on TV and everything, but I was a little bit hesitant when I saw Elijah Bryant kind of blow by him a couple times in a switch. Because he stands so high in his stance, he'll give up leverage in those situations from time to time. And he needs to just get a little bit better there. Just a little bit. It's not a big step. And I think as he continues to mature his frame and his body, there's a chance that he can kind of use his strength to outmuscle players. But having said that, the other thing that scares me, if he was to declare this year, he is very skinny. He is a very, very skinny human being. I was there in October and talked to them and did everything I needed to chat with their coaching staff and, chat with him and kind of see where he's at. I had forgotten how skinny he was from October until now. He's still a ways to go on his frame.
And that's the biggest worry for me right there.
Yeah, he's going to have to play the 5, I think.
And that's a bigger worry. It's I as a backup 5, I could definitely see him having value. So, I mean, that's what you're looking for really in the 20s anyway. You're probably not going to get a starting caliber player, at least historically, as far as percentage at that point. So you're looking for kind of a rotation piece potentially. And I think he can be that as a backup 5. But it's hard for me to see him in that many matchups. It's kind of like Dragan Bender's bigger than him, and he's fragile as well as far as diminutive build. He's skinny and he has a ton of problems, and he probably has more length than Tillie too, playing the 5. It's just hard.
Well,
that's
he's
a hard
7
business.
feet. Yeah, Tillie's 6'9", 6'10". Dragan is 7 feet and a little bit bigger. Yeah,
and you see the problems he has playing the 5 defensively. Offensively, Bender's at least I don't want to say valuable 5, but he can play the offensive 5. Tillie the same. I think he can play the offensive 5. It's more about anchoring your defense, and that's the biggest concern I have is the girth factor there.
Yeah, no, I'm right with you there. No question. I saw Rui Hachimura as well being at that game. Rui is the ultimate flashes guy right now, I would say. It's been that way all season. He only went for 4 points and 5 rebounds, but 2 of those 4 points were a play where he jumped a passing lane, got out on the break, led the break himself, did a right to left Euro step and finished with his left hand off the glass. It was absurd to see the body control that he has. He is already 6'8", 235, 240 pounds. He's one of the heaviest players on that team, and he carries his weight well. It's not like you have to worry about him getting overweight right now or anything like that. He is just a ridiculously strong human being who carries his weight throughout his length and throughout his frame well. To be able to do that at that size and that explosiveness level and that strength is just totally remarkable.
He looks like an NBA player. From the first time I watched him, the frame, the movement skills, those things are there. He has a little bit of skill. I'm not sure how much I believe in a lot of his skill elements. What do you think about his overall skill package offensively? Still
developing. I mean, he even knows it. I talked to him after the game. He told me that the plan right now for him, and this is, of course, subject to change depending on what happens in the postseason and everything like that, the plan for him is still to be a 3-year player at Gonzaga. So again, we'll see what happens if they make a run to the Final Four and he averages 15 points a night. That could obviously change. But, the good thing is that he's very comfortable shooting from a standstill right now. He's an 84% free throw shooter. He's not at all comfortable shooting off the move yet. And that's the next step for him, and that's what he knows. I talked to him after the game, and he was like, I really need to improve my shooting. That's just where I need to be at. As soon as he does that, and as he gets more comfortable with playing an American style of basketball and learning all of the defensive intricacies that he needs to know, he's going to be awesome. I think he is going to be a top 20 player in college basketball next season on the floor, not even as a prospect.
That's really encouraging. And you love to see the self-awareness and working on weaknesses and stuff. I can see a role for him in the NBA. It's pretty easy with his build to fit him into a modern NBA offense at the 4. And if he can develop his skill package there, I think he's going to be, I don't want to say potentially impactful. I'm not sure if I want to go that high, but I do think he'll probably be on the same progression. If he progresses how we think he can, he's going to be a first-round pick probably next year. Would you agree with that?
I think so. I'll have him in my top 30 for next year, unquestionably going into the year. Him and just personally too, like him and Tillie are both like kind of goofballs. Like it's pretty funny. They live together with Zach Norvell, and they're just like generally like funny dudes to talk to. They're both like constantly smiling and like kind of doing their thing. They're characters for sure. Let's talk about Troy Brown, because I've seen Troy Brown now twice over the course of the last 2 nights. I've seen him play in just abysmal basketball games the last 2 nights. The first night, I was very, very encouraged with him defensively. What have you thought of him defensively overall this year?
I think he's a great team defender, honestly, for his age.
Yeah.
He just gets it. He knows how to deny one pass away. I know some of that scheme-based, but he's physical. He'll put his body in front of the guy. He'll deny actions. Yep. He has a pretty good idea of where to be for the most part. Like, he's not the best leaper, so he can't really always take advantage of plays, but I think he reads passing lanes well. He knows when to be aggressive. Like, we saw that steal in the first night where he just gets it. I think that the mental stuff is there, and the strength is there for the most part, even though he's kind of a weird build. But as far as explosiveness and creating events, I don't know about protecting the rim and all that from the weak side. And he's not a twitchy athlete. I mean, that's the ultimate thing, is in space, smaller players can take advantage of him. So that's kind of my read on it. What do you think? He's really hard. So on the first night, I was encouraged with him athletically, actually. Okay. He did a really, really nice job on a tough guard in Malachi Flynn. I think Malachi Flynn, like, also is kind of an underrated, sneaky, like maybe 2 years down the road, potential scoring guard option for NBA teams, like as a 2nd-round pick. Like, he's got a shot because he can really shoot off the dribble and he can really change pace and direction. He's just small and he's a scoring guard. They threw him on Malachi Flynn in the second half of that game, and Flynn shot like 2 for 7. He was just so much bigger and so much longer that he did a really nice job on a guy who can really create his own shot. The second night, they kind of followed that plan. They tried to put him on Justin Bibbins, and Justin Bibbins is like 5'8". He's a little jitterbug. He's super, super fucking quick. And Troy Brown really struggled with him. Like he got like underneath leverage, or Justin Bibbins got underneath leverage on him just about every time, blew by him just about every time, and created a ton of looks. And eventually they had to go back to Elijah Brown on Bibbins. But I mean, I'm encouraged with him overall in terms of the defense. Now, a little bit less encouraged with him offensively. What are your thoughts on him offensively? I just don't know if he really feels comfortable in his role. This is a high school point guard. He's used to having the ball. He's kind of tried to adapt to a team construct. I think that most of the times he's unselfish to a fault. Like, he'll drive into the lane. He can shoot over the top of guys and he'll kick out. He's not super aggressive in that manner. But then we see times like last night where he'll just try to create, and it's kind of awkward because he'll like take a contested pull up and these running shots that I don't know if they're really high percentage shots, and they're just kind of like, okay, it's my turn. So I don't know if he's really felt comfortable in his role, but I think it's probably his offensive upside is a little bit higher than what he's shown, just because he has had some creation off the dribble. I mean, I've watched all his dribble pull-ups this year, and he has a little bit more than he gets credit for. He just rarely unleashes that in their offense, and he's a really unselfish player. He'll move the ball. I think that his drive and kick vision for a wing, he makes some pretty ridiculous passes on the move. He'll even like choose between 2 guys as far as reading the weak side defender in air and kind of kick it to the other guy that the defender doesn't go to. So I do like components of his game, but if you're talking about a guy who's going to get to the lane, finish at a high level with kind of how he's built, like his posture isn't that great, and that's something that worries me with the defense. He's always bent over, and when he runs, it's just not that natural. So I guess that's a long-winded way of saying I don't think he's going to be super impactful offensively. I think at a ceiling, maybe like a Chris Middleton type who can shoot over the top of mismatches. Hopefully he has better shot selection than that. But he's not going to be a dynamic get-to-the-rim guy. What do you think?
If he's Chris Middleton offensively, he should go in the top 10 of this draft. Like, Chris Middleton's really good offensively.
Yeah. No, I think that's his ceiling, but I don't know if he's going to reach it. That's the problem with him, is like there is downside. But I'm saying the upside, I think that's the kind of archetype player you would compare him to at his ceiling, but the question is, will he get there?
I think I generally agree with that. So I was I really like his frame, first and foremost. He's 6'7",
Yes.
really long arms, 6'11", 7-foot wingspan. Also pretty strong. Like, his shoulders are great. He's going to be able to put on a little bit of weight, a little bit of strength. The jump shot, he's in the 25th percentile off of catch and shoots, 23rd percentile off the dribble. The mechanics, I think, are a little bit better than what they were before he got to Oregon, I would say. I think there's a decent chance he's still just trying to learn like a new jump shooting technique, like new rhythm, new everything with his jumper. What I will say, there's a moment last night where he has the ball in the right wing, breaks down, goes right to left, step back, and hits like a 17-footer off the dribble. And I looked over and I saw Dana Altman, and Dana was like, okay, fine, you made it, good. And then on the next possession, he gets the ball, brings it down the floor, passes it off to Peyton Pritchard. Pritchard gives it back to him. He's in the same spot, drives, breaks down the defense, goes right to left, step back, and leaves it short. And Dana Altman literally just put his head in his hands and shook his head for like 4 straight shakes. He was just like, no, why are you doing this? I think that part of the reason, I say that because I think part of the reason he hasn't really fit within their offense is not just schematically, but like some of his own decisions have been poor this year. And that's what scares you from the perspective of drafting a guy to be a role player. He needs to have a bit of a better understanding of where his skill set is right now, I think. And he doesn't really do that all that often, but also like Oregon needs him to score. Like those dudes aren't really great at creating off the dribble. Like Elijah Brown creates to shoot threes. Peyton Pritchard creates, but is 6'1". They need someone like Troy Brown, and they need him to take chances, but sometimes he kind of crosses the red line, so to speak.
Yeah, I just think it looks awkward when he does try, because so often I think he just makes the extra pass and he plays within the realm of the offense. But like you noted, that team just doesn't have a lot of dynamism off the dribble. They don't really have anybody who can get shots consistently for themselves. I'd like to see him be more aggressive, but again, when he does, it just kind of looks a little unnatural. I don't think he's figured that out yet. So if there was one reason where he would return to Oregon, I mean, there's probably more than that, but I'm saying like maybe he gets a better feel for when to pick and choose his spots. I'm not sure if he'll get that opportunity to really showcase the self-creation stuff. I like to see that one dribble pull-up that you noted that he knocked down. That's a valuable shot for his size. If he has that in the NBA and he can shoot over the top of guys, that's something that you want to see. But at the college level, I get the coach being like, that's not the most high-value shot at the moment, especially when you follow it up with a miss like he did.
Yeah. What I will also say is that, like, I'll be surprised if he returns, just given where his stock is at this stage. That Oregon team is maybe the worst team in college basketball to watch this year. They make me so unhappy watching them.
Which sucks because they were so fun last year. They were my favorite team in college basketball to watch last year, and they're literally my least favorite team this year.
Yeah, it's just really not fun watching those guys play together. Let's move on. Let's talk about DeAndre Ayton real quick. He had his worst game of the year yesterday. I guess that there were some rumblings that his foot was bothering him a little bit. It wasn't or his ankle, I'm sorry. It wasn't his foot. If, foot problems get blown out of proportion for big guys, it wasn't that. It was just like a little mini ankle thing, I guess. Arizona kind of shot it down after the game, but, it was weird. Like, he kept taking his shoe off on the bench, and it made you wonder, like, okay, is he just maybe not right? He didn't really have the same explosiveness and bounce that he typically does. So I think something was up there regardless. We'll see how he plays tonight, though, against UCLA, where they have actual size to deal with him. Like, Thomas Welsh is a big dude who can play.
Yeah, and I didn't see any of that game, so unfortunately I can't really chime in on that, but looking forward to watching him tonight.
Yeah, and it's worth bringing up, like, a couple other guys on Arizona. Allonzo Trier, I think he's going to play in the NBA as a bench scorer. I know that nobody really looks like him, but anytime that you can create your own shot and hit it as efficiently as he does off the dribble, I think you have a role in the NBA. He's currently in the 97th percentile in shooting off the dribble this season, and he's averaging 19 points on a 69% true shooting percentage. He would be the first person in a quarter century to do that, have that efficiency on that many points per game.
I can definitely see him, attaching to a team. I'm not sure when he gets drafted. He probably goes in the second round. I think that kind of efficiency for what he can do. He has a skill set. I'm not sure if he'll stick, but I do think he's going to get a shot.
Yeah, it's funny too. Like, he literally quoted me exactly what his numbers were after the game. Like, he knows this stuff. He incredibly observant. He is incredibly he's just like one of my favorite dudes that I've covered, honestly. Like I'm a huge Allonzo Trier fan. Like I'm rooting for him uncategorically. I want that dude to succeed because he has gotten like this really shitty reputation, I think, throughout college basketball too. Like he had the, PED tests that were positive that he won appeal on for not taking purposefully. He plays for Arizona when, that team has had so many issues in terms of getting potential sanctions thrown on them from the FBI scandal. He's gotten a lot of shit, and I don't think he's really deserved it. He's kind of the antithesis of what people think he is.
That's good perspective. I mean, I even bought into that narrative a little bit just because that's all you ever hear about him is more in the negative fashion. But I don't really root against anybody, so I'm pulling for him.
Yeah, no, I don't either. And speaking of that, I mean, another great dude that I've gotten a chance to talk with a few times over the years, just being out here in LA, is Aaron Holiday. I flat out have that dude as a first rounder right now. He has been one of the 5 best point guards in college basketball this season. He's averaging over 20 points and nearly 6 assists a night. It's like 5.9 on a 62.1 true shooting percentage. The only player in the last 25 years who has done that at the high major level is Damon Stoudemire at Arizona back in 1995. What Aaron Holiday is doing this year is going way under the radar, and he's done it while playing, I would say, above average defense. He got all Pac-12 defense. Like McKinley Wright might be a little bit better than he is defensively. Like I'm not going to sit here and argue tooth and nail with him being on the team, but he is everything to UCLA, and he's going to be a really, really good role player in the NBA, I think.
I moved him into my top 40 right now, so I'm a little bit less high on him just because when I've watched him, like he's just missed so many reads as a passer. I know he has that toughness and physicality. Like he's a bulldog getting downhill. Like he'll use his body for his size. You just don't see a lot of guys that are built like him that have the kind of aggressiveness. He can shoot off the dribble. There are alluring qualities. I think he's going to be, by the end of this, probably a top 35 guy for me. And I do think there's a role in the NBA for him. You can get a backup point guard, potentially a starter. I think he profiles better as a backup just with his size.
Yep. But
he has a skill set that translates because he can score. You can bring him off the bench. He can score at a higher usage and less minutes, and that's the kind of dynamic point guard you kind of want in the modern game to create offense of themselves and for others in a short period of time in a backup role.
Yeah, one place he's really, really improved that I think is worth pointing out like extensively is the way that he finishes around the basket. His first year at UCLA, he shot 35.2% in the half court around the basket. That was in the 8th percentile. This year, he is in the 54th percentile in terms of shooting off the basket. He's up over 50% there. It's a really, really good number. I think he's actually at like 57, 58 now that I think about it. He's really improved a lot over the course of his career, and I think he is. I think he's going to play in the NBA for a long time. He has a very mature approach. He's going to be a solid backup that, Shelvin Mack is a backup point guard right now and has been in the NBA for like 8 years. Aaron Holiday is better than Shelvin Mack.
Yeah, how would you rate him compared to Jalen Brunson? Would you take Holiday over Brunson?
I probably would, just because of the defense. He's going to be a lot easier to translate defensively due to his length and due to his just overall tenacity defensively.
I think it's fair. I think I like Brunson a little bit more, just his IQ. And I think for that role, I don't know if you really care. I mean, you obviously care about defense, but I'm not sure if it's as important if they're both backups. So if you're thinking of Holiday as a potential starter down the road, I could see maybe ranking him a little bit higher. I'm a big Brunson guy. I know you are too, so I'm just curious on how you kind of gauge those two.
Yeah. Speaking of defense, you wrote about team defense as a market inefficiency among draft prospects. I agree with you on this. I don't think I would go as far as you on it, but I totally agree with you that it's a market inefficiency. Kind of give me a rundown on what you wrote over at the Stepien.
Yeah, so I just fixated on different prospects. I picked 10 in this class, guys like Jacob Evans, Gary Clark, who kind of we have at the Stepien a little bit higher than consensus, just because in part due to team defense acumen. So just kind of walking through, using Lonzo as the primary example of how the draft community views defense overall. So with Lonzo, we fixated a lot on the point of attack stuff, getting around screens, which is a very valid concern, and it has proven to be that. his defense against De'Aaron Fox in space, that was where the emphasis lied. And that was kind of the conclusion, was that maybe he wasn't going to be a plus NBA defensive player, but he has been. And the reason he has been is because of team defense ability, his IQ, his positioning, his awareness, all of the reactionary athleticism that he has just adds to that defensive profile. So really just trying to suss out kind of a systemic issue that I have with, evaluating defense in separate components. So like when we talk about a big defensively, we usually talk about the interior and the exterior and the perimeters, which makes sense because that's the two levels you play at. But
to be honest, we should probably even break it down with bigs more. We should say, like, how good is he in pick and roll and recovery? How good is he being left on an island with a guard? And then get into, like, interior rotations and post defense. You know what I mean?
Exactly. And I think that rotation stuff is what I'm talking about, too, with bigs, is like, how timely are you on that? Your positioning, how sound is that? So there's just so many different elements that can't be captured via most statistics and via most eye tests, because when you watch a game and there's multiple prospects, how often are you really paying attention to team defense for a specific prospect? It's hard, right? You have to spend a lot of time sussing that out. Not a lot of guys do that. So I think that leads to the inefficiency sometimes. You look at some of the guys who have stuck in the league, guys like Jared Dudley, Joe Ingles, those types of positional size guys who just know where to be, Kyle Anderson. There's a reason they're in the league, and they're adding value. And I think a lot of that is due to just understanding how to play the damn game. And that's kind of what you talk about with team defense. A lot of that reflects intellect, in my opinion. So it's just a different perspective to kind of look at that.
And like in the NBA, too, another thing that goes way underrated that neither of us have mentioned yet in this conversation is gap defense. It is so hard to play gap defense in the NBA just because of all of the open space within the larger offensive zone. If you can play gap defense in college basketball and like do it really, really effectively, like Jacob Evans does this really well, Josh Reeves does this really well. If you can play gap defense in college basketball and, kind of show that, you're really good at doing something small, like bumping cutters and then recovering back out to your guy and making sure that, that gets stopped immediately. If you can, just kind of stand in that middle range off the ball so that you're not only contesting one player who is near the basket, but also you're in position to get back onto your own player once he gets the ball 2 passes away from where you are right now. That stuff is so underrated, and it's really, really a nice barometer for knowing how, impactful a player can become defensively. Now, where I think that you are a little bit higher on this than me is that you've always been more of an instincts guy, whereas I value athleticism at the NBA level a little bit more. The way that I kind of think about it is I want positional size, I want quickness, and I want like defensive awareness, right? In Lonzo's case, I think we way underrated his quickness coming into the draft. He's very bad on ball because he had no idea how to defend screens and just didn't know how to get into a defensive stance. But everyone would say his awareness and defensive instincts off ball were really, really good. And he's quicker than I think he gets credit for. And the reason that I say that is that I think he got underrated as a, quicker athlete because he has such a high dribble and he's, just doesn't have a great handle for a point guard, that it takes him just like that split second longer to attack off the dribble. And I think that a lot of people kind of ascribe that to his defensive ability in a way. Does that make sense?
That's a fair point. I think still his quickness level defensively moving laterally isn't spectacular. I think it might have been a little underrated, like you noted. I think his top end acceleration is fantastic. I think that's when you look at him, and we kind of said his top end speed and transition with the ball offensively, like that translated. Like he's legit pretty fast with the ball in an opening setting, and I think the same goes for his defensive ability, like closing out. A lot of that's effort too, and Lonzo just plays super hard, so that really helps, and that helps offset some of the weaknesses. But he really does hit that top gear, accelerating, like you noted, gap defense. If he's positioned between two guys on the weak side, like a lot of guys you see in the NBA with a spread pick and roll, so you have to tag the big, rotate back. The value of having a guy who is 6'6", who has length, who knows where to be and plays hard is super valuable because you can make decisions on the weak side. And I think that's just goes to the overall point of thinking about defense in that way as well, not just on ball as far as containing guys in space, even though that's obviously very important. Like you noted, if you have positional size, quickness, and awareness, you're probably a really great defensive player. I mean, if you have all those qualities.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with you. Let's kind of just run through some of the guys you mentioned. So Jacob Evans, what scares me about Jacob Evans is the lack of quickness, but positional size, positional length, great instincts, and he's just super tough. Like, I believe in that guy. Like, I'll probably have him in my first round whenever I update again, right before the NCAA tournament next week. Josh Reeves, what scares me is the lack of positional size on his end. He is like a wing defender that's like 6'3".
Yeah, both valid concerns. I think that's why you can't move him up more than I have them, just because, I mean, Josh Reeves, how many impactful defenders are 6'3", 6'4" in the NBA? Like Tony Allen? Like, there's just not a very long list of guys who actually make a difference. And his instincts are, I think, going to play a role, but he has to shoot as well. So there's just more question marks. Jacob Evans, I totally agree with the quickness. I think that's why you can't profile him as like a stopper. Because like the stopper types, they have both quickness and they have strength. They can play on the ball and off the ball. Right. And that's why Jacob Evans is more of a team defensive player, because he just knows where to be. He's more like a Sterling Brown to me, who just knows where to be defensively. And Jacob Evans can protect the rim a little bit. Like, he actually finishes plays contesting shots. So if you put him on the weak side of your defense and he's choosing between, tagging the roll man, rotating back to his guy, he's already doing all that stuff for Cincinnati. Like, he knows how to switch, communicate, and then protect the rim. It's just his instincts level and his size. I think that's going to matter.
So the second guy is Gary Clark, right? Gary Clark scares me both from a positional size and a athleticism standpoint, but he also might have better defensive instincts than anyone in the draft.
I totally agree. And I said even I wouldn't be surprised if he didn't get drafted. I mean, I think that's a reasonable outcome for him just because of the two elements you noted. There's not going to be a lot of NBA executives that are going to believe in just passing the first couple thresholds of size and athleticism. And on ball, like, I don't think he's that great either. Like, he gets beat by guys he should not get beat by at times. Like Landry Shamet blew right by him. He just doesn't have that recovery length to really impact. But if you put him in a team construct, yes, exactly. So the athleticism stuff, I'm there with you. And that's why I have him in my second round, and I moved him up higher than that, just because I feel like there are limitations that could be damning. But at the same time, I do think there's a role for somebody like that potentially in the league. If he can shoot the ball and he can defend in a team construct, I think he can be on a roster. It was one of the 15 best, or one of the 15 players on a roster.
Yeah, Kenrich Williams is another guy that you have. I like Kenrich Williams. I am worried about the quickness in every way.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's a little underrated, actually, as an athlete. Like, I've watched probably 4 or 5 TCU games this year, and he hasn't really stood out as like a terrible quickness guy. I know he's not great, but his position is just so good. It's one of the best I've seen all year as far as a guy who just knows where to be in a team construct. And you look at, again, guys like I noted, Jared Dudley, Joe Ingles, those guys aren't quick. Like, those guys can't really slide explosively. They aren't fast. They just know where to be. They rotate early. They get to their spots, and with their size, they can be somewhat of an impediment because they're not a complete disaster as far as in switches. They can hold up and offer resistance. So, yeah, I just think that his elements there are a little underrated. I'm not saying he's going to be an impactful defensive player, and I get your concerns. Like, this entire list, you can make arguments against every one of these guys, athletically and size-wise.
Well, I'll actually say the next one. I don't know that you can really make a case against Shea Alexander from Kentucky. I'm sorry. He is super, super long. Despite not being a great vertical athlete, he's very quick. Like, his first step, movement is very, very quick. And he has really good instincts. Like, he knows how to switch and communicate already. He's really good at getting through screens despite being very skinny. I think he actually is a really good defensive prospect.
He is. He's really solid. I believe in him in so many ways. It's just when you talk about ultra quick twitch defensively, I don't know if he has that super quickness that you need to defend point guards, and he's not very strong. Like, if he adds to his frame and he can really switch and guard wings effectively, offering resistance strength-wise, then I'm with you. I think there are still question marks there, but the length is just going to matter so much, and he uses it so well. He's a really functional athlete with his length. I think he's going to be a plus defensive player in the league. I just don't know how high I'd rank him up. That's just my issue with him overall, is he's really good. It's just how impactful and how much value can he really provide in the NBA.
Now we're going to get into the two guys that I think are probably going to be the most kind of controversial that you wrote about here. Wendell Carter as a good defender. I agree with this to a point. I think that he knows where to be, and that is a really important part of it. He has a 7'3" wingspan. That is also a really important part of it. I think he really just gets dusted too often whenever he's left on an island with a guy or whenever he's trying to recover on pick and rolls.
Sure. I think there's definitely that's a valid complaint of his. I don't think he's great in space. I've said specifically in the piece, he's not a switch guy. He's not an aggressive pick and roll defender where you can really have him hard edge and recover. I don't think that's how you want to use him. But I also think there's a lot of intelligence there as far as his backline defense in Duke's system, where he's caught a lot in these 2-on-1 situations where he has to really like flinch at a guy. And you see that a lot in the NBA where there's an advantage situation and the big really has to make the perimeter player unveil their hand because there could be an easy basket there. And I think he's really good at being in the right position. He plays hard. There are going to be issues. Like, he's going to get exploded over the top at the basket, and that's why there's always going to be a trade-off with him defensively. Same with Jonte, is they're not going to be super impactful. But I don't think, like, you look at a guy like Al Horford, and that's exactly who everybody compares him to. I'm not sure if he's quite as fluid defensively as Horford is. No. But Horford wins with positioning, too. Like, he doesn't win because he's super great as far as a rim protector. Guys can explode over the top of him, too. But he's so smart. He's in the right positions that he can kind of mitigate some of that. So that's kind of what I'm getting at with Carter.
I think that's fair, but I think Al is a considerably better lateral athlete. And, like, you're not comparing him to Horford either. You know what I mean? Like, that's not what you're doing. That's the popular one kind of nationally because we try and put people into boxes too often. But, like, I understand what you mean when you say it, though, nonetheless, because he is a very, very smart player. He knows exactly what he's doing there. Now, you mentioned if you polled most people on Twitter, I'm guessing Bagley would be considered the better defender than Carter. I don't think that would be true, to be honest, but I do think that Bagley does have better defensive potential than Carter.
Interesting. Yeah, I would actually, potential. If we're talking about a likely outcome, I would disagree. But if we're talking about ceiling that I don't think will get realized, then I would agree. I think that Bagley, when he sits down, he's obviously better agility than Carter has. There's no question there. But honestly, like, so much of the NBA defense is just being able to diagnose plays quickly, rotate to the right spots. And I trust Carter way more than I trust Bagley there. Like, I don't know. I don't think they're even comparable in that fashion. I
agree with you, but I would also point out that Marvin Bagley was being coached by his dad up until like 2 years ago, or up until like 6 months ago. I'm sorry. Not to like shit on Marvin Bagley Jr., but like, I mean, come on. Like, there's a big difference here in terms of the coaching he's going to get there and the coaching he got in the NBA.
Sure.
Jonte is the other one. Jonte is very, very, very good positionally, and I do think he's actually a little bit less of a lumberer than Wendell is. I guess that what I would say is that he's lighter on his feet is the better way to put it.
That's fair. Yeah, and he looks like a teddy bear, man. Like, I think there's athletic upside there as far as his frame. If he can add explosiveness, I think he can be, potentially, I don't want to say impactful defender, but I think he can be a passable NBA defender. I'm not as high on his defensive ability as some, even though I know he's really smart. He gets blocks for a guy his size. He knows where to be and position himself. He's going to get rinsed if he switches on to a dynamic point guard in the NBA. He just doesn't have the length to stay close enough to contest pull-ups and then also contain drives. I get that. But if he adds athletic potential, I think he might be salvageable in that fashion. He's not really talked about like that often, right? I mean, the concerns are obvious. You look at him, you watch him move. He's maybe a little bit underrated in movement skills, but at the basket, he just gets exploded over the top consistently. And that's going to happen in the NBA level. It's just, can he add enough pop? Can he add a little bit more mobility? He definitely has upside in his frame, though. I think that's what it comes down to for me is he's not physically developed yet. He's the youngest guy in the draft. Maybe there's some upside there.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Just real quick, I want to run through some of the top prospects in regard to this thesis because I do think it's interesting. DeAndre Ayton, how would you rate him at this stage?
As a team defender?
Yes.
I think that's his biggest weakness. I mean, in his overall game. So I wouldn't rate him high. I mean, he's a good pick and roll defender. When he's on the ball and he's fixated, I think he's actually probably one of the best bigs in the class because he's so quick and he's powerful. He can absorb contact, but knowing where to be and positioning himself, rotating, we've talked about this in the past. I think that's his biggest weakness.
Marvin Bagley.
I think that's his biggest weakness as well.
Yeah.
Is knowing where to be. So yeah.
And by the way, like, other than Jonte and Wendell Carter, all the guys that we talked about at the top of this were upperclassmen. You know what I mean? Like, it takes time on defense. It really takes time defensively. I think it's worth mentioning. Jaren Jackson, on the other hand.
A+.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know how else. I mean, sometimes he screws up sometimes, of course, because most young guys do, but his instincts are just ridiculous as a team help defender.
Let's skip Porter, Mohamed Bamba.
I think he's more of, I don't know. I feel like sometimes he recognizes stuff quickly. It's just he's kind of slow to react at times. I'll give him like a B around that area. I think he's okay. He understands what's going on for the most part, and for him it doesn't matter as much because he's got a 7'9" wingspan, so he's got a higher margin for error. But I'm not super high on his quick reaction ability. I think that's what would knock him down a little bit for me. What about you?
I think he rotates super well toward the basket in help. I don't think he's super good whenever he's away from the ball and like teams are kind of going through their offensive sets.
Fair.
Trae Young.
I don't even know what to give this. I don't know what his instincts are. For someone who's so good offensively as far as instincts, his help D is basically standing around the perimeter, pulling crazy switches, pointing things that he wants other guys to do, and not fouling. So I don't know what you do with that.
Yeah, Mikal Bridges?
Oh, I give him an A.
Yeah, I think he's very
awesome.
good. That's
why
very
I like
good.
him so much. Yeah, he's so good. He's a guy that I think his only weakness as a defensive player is his lack of girth. If he was 225, 230 pounds, that's a guy that is every team in the league needs somebody like that. They already need Bridges as is, but he's an awesome team defender.
Miles Bridges.
Oh, that's interesting. It's less high for me. I think that's where he struggles. He has those mental lapses, and that's kind of what I tried to point out in the piece as far as three-point shooting. Like, if you lapse for a second in the NBA now and you can't recover, that's an open three. I think Miles does that a little bit too much for my liking. So I wouldn't go super high. I think he's more average. What do you think?
I would say slightly above average, but his length really hinders him in that way. He just has less margin for error. Like, I think he knows what's going on for the most part, but if he just loses it for like a small second, it's a lot harder for him to recover because, like him and Mikal Bridges are about the same size, but Mikal has like 5 inches of length on him. And that's a significant, help for NBA defenders and significant help even for college defenders.
Agreed.
Do we want to talk about like Daniel Gafford and Colin Sexton in regard to this? Like, do we care?
Yeah, I guess we can. I mean, you talked about Gafford last week or last time we did this. I think he's pretty good here just because of his motor. I mean, he's always going to try to help, and that's a quality that a lot of bigs don't necessarily have. Sexton, I don't really know what to do with, honestly. I'll let you take away with that.
Yeah, I mean, he tries real hard on the ball. Their defense in general is pretty good. Like, I don't think he loses guys all that often. I think he's fine, but I don't know. Like, he's fine. It's the epitome of his game. He's fine.
I think for a lot of these guys, they're fine, and that's how a lot of guys analyze them. It's like, oh, did they pass a certain threshold? Like Lonnie Walker, he'll have games where he's pretty solid defensively. It's not like affirmatively good, but it's fine. And he'll have games like Wake Forest where he's horrible. So what I look for is like, does a guy like affirmatively put that on tape that he's a good, like impactful team defender? So that's kind of what I look for. Like a guy like Zaire Smith is really good team defender, and Tankathon has him at number 12 right now. I just noticed. That's okay.
I'm skeptical of that.
I know.
Cole, tell the people where they can find your work.
As always, at the Step In, the article that we just covered on team defense, check that out as an inefficiency. I think that'll be featured for the next couple of days. Ben Rubin just wrote a really awesome pre-tournament piece
just
about.
Go read Ben all the time.
Ben's ridiculous, dude. He's so good. So he had a really insightful piece. Basically, his first centralized piece of all his thoughts on most of the guys in this draft. You need to read that because he's super insightful. So check that out on the Step In.
Yeah. You can read me over at The Athletic. You can follow this podcast on iTunes, SoundCloud, Google Play, Android, anywhere where you can get podcasts. Please go subscribe to this. Please go subscribe to the Fieldhouse podcast. We'll be back with that later this week at some point, probably after the selection show. Beyond that, that's really all I got. So until next time, we'll talk soon. Bye.